Mr. Secretary, on page 10 of your written statement, you express what I think is justified frustration in the extended period of time it took you to get a team in place with which to make these decisions. You list 9 of your senior staff, the earliest of whom was confirmed on the 3rd of May 2001, and the last of whom, interestingly enough, an Assistant Secretary for International Security Policy, not until August 6th. And you say that the confirmation system, that kind of confirmation system and those delays just don't work in the 21st century. I can greatly sympathize with you on that, but you leave out one very important factor. When were those 9 people nominated and actually sent to the Senate?
Well, I wasn't suggesting in this that in fact, I hope I phrased it more elegantly than you did. My point here, my point, whether I made it well or not, my point is not simply the Senate confirmation, but the clearance process, the entire process. Finding them, putting them through the FBI, putting them through multiple ethics. It took weeks for people to fill out their ethics forms. It cost a fortune for some people to fill out their ethics forms. And then you have to go from the one in the executive branch to the one in the United States Senate and have that filled out in different forms. Some of you may have been through this. It's an amazing process. And then some guy walks in and gives you a drug test. It is not just the Senate, although the Senate can be a problem. With all respect.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So, in your view, it's the whole process
entirely
from
yes.
a new administration finding who they want, getting them through various clearances, and then the Senate. But we don't know here how long the Senate part of that took in any one of these cases.
Well, I know, and I could give it to you if you're interested.
I think that I think I would be interested.
We tried to parse it out to see how long each piece took.
All right.
And the Senate is just a part of it.
Okay. Thank you. On page 16 of your statement, and you've referred to this in connection with Senator Kerry's questions, you ask and answer the question with respect to why nothing was done with respect to the attack on the Cole in the Bush administration. And you say, in fact, to do it 4 months later might have been set a signal of weakness. Now, were the reasons for no specific response to the Cole, one, that you were still uncertain about who was responsible to it, 2, that by the time you were in office, say in February of 2002, it was simply too late to respond specifically to an incident that had taken place the previous October, or 3, that there just wasn't anything to shoot at?
Let me respond this way. First of all, it was 7.5 months. Someone earlier specified that it was all year, which is not really the case. It was 7.5 months between the day the president was sworn in and the day of September 11th. 7 3/4 months for the sake of precision. You say nothing was done. A great deal was done. The Cole Commission did a good job. They made a whole series of recommendations, and the Department of Defense implemented those recommendations. In my view, that is not nothing. You're right. As the time passed, 2 things were happening. Time was passing since the event of the Cole attack, where 17 Americans and military personnel were killed. Time passed, and we became farther and farther away from that event. And the other thing that was happening is that the policy was being developed to deal with al-Qaeda and the country that was harboring them. Last, and as you got closer to that, and you got farther away from the Cole event, it became logical, it seems to me, to look more towards the comprehensive approach and some sort of a repeat of what had happened after the embassy bombings or after some of the earlier events, which without criticizing the responses that took place then, the fact that that had been all there was led us, me, I should say, to feel very deeply that the president ought not to simply fire off cruise missiles. That in the event he was going to make a response, he had to put people on the ground, he had to put people at risk, he had to show a seriousness of purpose, or the administration would be seen as a continuum from the lobbing cruise missiles after an attack with relatively modest effect.
Your statement, both oral and written, in following up on that, is quite impressive with respect to the preparation for a broader policy that took place in the 7 months prior to 9/11. And on September 4th, there was a fairly definitive recommendation, which you say would almost certainly have been adopted even in the absence of 9/11.
Oh, I think I said that I would have favored adopting it.
Okay.
I don't want to prejudge
All
what
right,
would have happened.
I'll modify the question at that point. That program, as we understand it, had three parts. First, there'd be one more diplomatic attempt with the Taliban to see if they would give up Osama bin Laden. Second, we would begin to arm the Northern Alliance and various tribes in Afghanistan to stir up trouble there and hope that perhaps they could capture Osama bin Laden. And third, if those didn't work, there would be a military response that would be substantial, much more than lobbying cruise missiles into the desert. But as we understand it, this was seen as a 3-year program if we had to go to the third stage. My question is, given World Trade Center 1, given the embassy bombings, given the Millennium Plot, given the coal, given the declaration of war by Osama bin Laden, what made you think that we had the luxury of that much time? Even 7 months, much less 3 years, before we could cure this particular problem.
Well, let me answer two ways. Number one, I didn't come up with the 3 years. I tend to scrupulously avoid predicting that I'm smart enough to know how long something's going to take, because I know I don't know. Where that number came from, I don't know. In fact, dealing with the terrorism threat is going to take a lot longer than 3 years. And in fact, dealing with the Afghanistan piece of it took a lot less, as you point out. It seems to me that it's interesting that you cite that, because in fact, the President and Secretary Powell made an attempt early on, one last try to separate the Taliban from the Al-Qaeda, and it failed. Not surprisingly, they'd been rather stiff, but it failed flat.
It even failed after 9/11, didn't it?
Exactly, that's my point. After 9/11, it failed flat. The other concern we had was that we had precious little information about the groups in Afghanistan. We had enough information that there were people knowledgeable who were concerned that if all we did was help the Northern Alliance, as opposed to some other elements in the country, we may end up being quite unsuccessful, and that the goal was to try to get a broader base of support in the country, and that took some time. And the part you left out was that we decided, I decided, the President decided, everyone decided quite early that we had to put U.S. forces in that country, and that was not a part of that plan. That was something that came along after September 11th.
Well, Mr. Secretary, that's a good answer, but it isn't an answer to the question that I asked you.
My question is, I don't know.
The
3 years, I just don't know.
The question that I asked you was, what made you think, even when you took over and got these first briefings, given the history of Al-Qaeda and its successful attacks on American interests, that we had the luxury even of 7 months before we could make any kind of response, much less 3 years?
And my answer was on point. I said I didn't come up with 3 years, and I can't defend that number. I don't know where that came from. With respect to 7 months, I've answered. My testimony today lays out what was done during that period. Do you have you phrase it, do you have the luxury of 7 months? In reflecting on what happened on September 11th, the question is obviously, the good Lord willing, things would have happened prior to that that could have stopped it. But something to have stopped that would have had to happen months and months and months beforehand. Not 5 minutes, or not 1 month, or 2 months, or 3 months. And the counter argument, it seems to me, is do you have the luxury of doing what was done before and simply just heaving some cruise missiles into the thing and not doing it right? I don't know. We thought not. It's a judgment.
Let me ask you the same question that I asked of Senator Powell. At one level, you could claim, but you're too modest and too cautious to claim, that your policies since 9/11 have been successful. That is to say, there has not been another successful terrorist attack, on the United States. We all know, as Senator Powell pointed out, that risk is still there, and it's going to be there for as long as any of us can imagine. But nonetheless, we've now gone 2.5 years without any such attack. What do you think of, or how do you evaluate our provisional success in that connection? How much of it is just luck? How much of it is hardened targets, the steps we've taken for Homeland Security? How much of it is more effective intelligence and prevention, both through your department and elsewhere? How much of it is due to the fact that we've attacked the source, and to a large extent, in Afghanistan at least, eliminated it? Give me your own views as to what you think we've done right and the importance of those things that we've done right, and how much have we ended or reduced the amount of terrorism in the world itself, and how much have we just displaced it and caused it to take place in other places?
As a former pilot, one of the things you always did was you never talked about the fact there hadn't been a flight accident for a long time.
That's true.
And with good reason. You start doing that and something happens. The fact is, a terrorist can attack any time, any place, using any technique, and we can't defend everywhere at every moment against every technique, and we could have a terrorist attack anywhere in the world tomorrow. And we have to recognize that. This is a tough business we're in, and it is difficult, and it's challenging. Now, to the good side. A 90-nation coalition is a big thing. The fact that all of those countries are cooperating, sharing intelligence, helping to find bank accounts, helping to put pressure on terrorists coming across their borders, helping to put pressure on things moving across their borders. Is it perfect? No. Are things still porous? Yes. Is money still getting there? Yes. But everything is harder. Everything is more difficult today. It's tougher to recruit. It's tougher to train. It's tougher to retain. It's tougher to finance. It's tougher to move things. It's tougher to communicate with each other for those folks. Someone asked me, what is Osama bin Laden masterminding all of this? And I said, who knows? But if I were in issues, I think I'd be spending an awful lot of times trying to not get caught. Most of his time's probably spent trying not to get caught. And so he's busy. And that's a good thing. And there's been a lot of pressure. How to put a value on that, I don't know. What worries me is the last point I mentioned in my prepared remarks, and that was this issue of how many people are coming in the intake. How many people are being trained to go out and kill innocent men, women, and children? We've got a lot of good things going on, capturing and killing and putting pressure on terrorists today. And every day that cooperation within our government and between 90 nations gets better and better and better. the intelligence fusion cells that are taking place, the cooperative arrangements between the United States and other militaries, the cooperative arrangements between the Department of Defense and the CIA, every day they get better. But at the same time, we know of certain knowledge that money's going to madrasa schools that are training people to kill people. And that's a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr.